I'm Michael Pierce, and this is The Human Condition. Our topic today is how to train your brain for a happier and healthier life. We're looking at brain training tips and tricks and some concepts on how to change your brain without just brute force, because brute force doesn't really work. Brute force is this concept that you just beat yourself up and you'll get better, when you just force yourself to get better. That's not the way to do it, although I will say that there is some repetition involved, and I'll explain that when we get to the basal ganglia. So today we'll be talking about neuroplasticity and brain exercises, neurofeedback and self-talk, and ways of trying to get your brain back in order if it's been doing its own thing and it feels like it's a horse run away and you don't have control of the reins anymore. So let's dive right in. We need to talk about the most important factor is called the basal ganglia. Now, the basal ganglia is a bunch of deep nuclei, deep centers in the brain that are buried down under your cortex. So the cortex is the surface of your brain, and it's about 6 layers thick, just a few millimeters. The cells from that area fire down to the basal ganglia nuclei, like centers of action that are underground and centers of control, and the basal ganglia centers fire up to the cortex to make it active. So if you've looked at the brain and all of its folds, like this little guy behind me over here, you can see over my left shoulder, that brain there. That's the cortex. And so that's responsible for things like when people do math or think about word finding, or they move their eyes around, or they move their hands or their feet. They have different motor and sensory and thought areas for doing math and using language and switching language and even music. There's right brain and left brain functions, and those are mostly what we call cortical functions. The basal ganglia exists to serve you, it exists to help you, and it exists to give you subroutines like a computer. So what you do with your basal ganglia is you feed it things. I've talked about it before. You feed it tasks, and it takes over those tasks if you've done them enough. So if you know how to drive a car, and you're really good at driving a car, you can do other things while you drive the car, like open a can of soda and drink the water or the soda. You can brush your teeth and do other things, like brush your teeth and talk on the phone or push some buttons, or do something else with your other hand, like comb your hair. There's many things you can do that are automatically automated and run by your basal ganglia. Their names are probably not terribly important for you, but things like the caudate, putamen, globus pallidus, internus, and externus, the subthalamic nucleus, and the claustrum are broad areas that are part of the basal ganglia, depending on which textbook you read. And they really have an on and an off switch. So there's like a gas pedal for the right hemisphere, and a brake pedal for the right hemisphere, and a gas pedal for the left hemisphere, and a brake pedal for the left hemisphere. And so we call that the direct pathway and the indirect pathway, the gas and the brakes on each side. So imagine a kind of a schizophrenic car that's got a driver on the right seat and a driver in the left seat, and that's your left and right hemisphere. And usually one side is dominant. In most people, for most of the time, in Western worlds, our left brain is dominant. That's less so in Asian minds, generally from EEG studies that show that the Asian cultures tend to use their hemispheres more equally, whereas Western cultures tend to be much more heavily left brain dominant. In any case, for you and for me and for us, if we want to change our brain, we've got to allow enough habits for our basal ganglia to start automatically doing something. And so the most important things that we talk about are actually quite mystical. And I'd like to explain the foundation for that mystical stuff. You may have heard mystical statements that say, if you do something for 21 days, it'll become a habit. And the reason for that is if you do enough work that your basal ganglia can take over, it will start to realize, oh, he wants me to do this regularly and routinely and develop a subroutine. And so it becomes like shaving your face or your legs. It becomes like brushing your teeth. It becomes like driving a car. And it can even become, for some of you, like driving a shift car, like if you drive a car with a clutch and a manual transmission, or if you're a motorcycle driver that has a manual transmission and not like a scooter where you actually have to go through the gears and shift with the clutch. That becomes automatic, and you can do other things. You might have watched movies and wondered, how in the world do those motorcycle assassins ride a clutch motorcycle and shoot their guns? That's how. They've got a basal ganglia, and that basal ganglia is what gives them the ability to have a subroutine that takes over. So you've got to do something repeatedly enough to make it work, and it feels repetitive and it feels like a lot of work until you get it going. And so building that habit is extremely important. One of those habits is positive thinking. It's making sure that when you catch yourself with negative thinking, if you have negative self-talk, if you have patterns or loops that you're doing, that you interrupt that pattern and try to redirect yourself towards something else. Now, I don't believe that just repetition works. Some people believe in mantras. That could work. I don't see it work in my patients a lot with just a mantra like positive reinforcement, just saying a sentence like, I am wealthy and have enough money. That's nice and that works, but I would rather have you do something that's more creative and a little bit different each time. It'll have better sticking power if you do that for your basal ganglia. And that would mean something like telling yourself, what do I want in form? What do I want in function? What do I want to feel like instead of this? And so then you think about that positive thing, and that really helps. It's helped me a lot, and it's helped my patients a lot. And it seems to me to be a lot easier than just repeating a mantra of a repeated set of words. Now, mantras are great for meditation, and they're great for calming you down, and they're great for self-regulation. But if you want to change your basal ganglia, you need to have a little more active focus. So that's the idea is whenever there's a negative thought or a bad feeling or a repetitive thought, interrupt it with, what do you want things to be like? And the form of the things, the feeling of the things, not so much the specifics, because if you get involved in the specifics of, oh my God, I don't really know how to get there. I don't know the details. I don't know how to do that. Don't get stuck in the how. Get more stuck in the what. Get more into and really wallow in and feel the what. I want it to feel like this. I want it to be like that. I want to be with these kind of people. I want to be with these kind of environments. I want to have these kind of resources. And I think that's really necessary, even though you may not know how and you may not be able to do or have the skills to do each of the pieces. Let it in, really welcome it in, and realize that other people will come along and other resources and will come along and help you with those things if you really, really want it. So I think that the basal ganglia is important. The right and left basal ganglia are different, and you don't have to really decide which basal ganglia you're using. I think that the changing of the brain is automatically the right basal ganglia in the right brain. When you do the same old stuff, you tend to be stuck in the left brain. So when you do things the same way over and over again, and you let yourself have the same thought patterns, your left brain tends to be dominant. So just the act of thinking about change is really a good way of activating the right basal ganglia and allowing it to change. And that will automatically change the left hemisphere, because the right hemisphere is really the master and the left one is the emissary. if you're into Ian McGilchrist. And I know some of you may reverse that depending on how you think about it. But so let's talk about a few more things. If a person has a lot of toxic exposure, the substrate of the chemistry of the brain is not going to work well. And so you might find that things that worked for you in the past don't work now. You may find that your ability to detoxify is extremely important. You may want to take charcoal, activated charcoal. You may want to take glucosamine sulfate or other binders. You may want to take detoxifying herbs like milk thistle and turmeric. Now, I realize that I've got a carnivore following and a ketogenic following as well. And yes, Paul Saladino and some of the others say that you don't really need those herbs. And I agree that you don't really need those herbs if you're on a fully carnivore or keto diet that really doesn't involve a lot of plant foods. However, if you're transitioning, which almost everybody is transitioning, you're going to be moving from a plant-based and a largely carnivore and processed food diet towards a really healthy Eskimo or carnivore diet that is much more animal fats and animal products. While you're doing that, you might find that turmeric and boswellia and milk thistle are really good, and that glucosamine and other types of things, which glucosamine is an animal product. It comes from shrimp shells and other types of fish shells, and the chitin that is the hard part of the carapace of the lobster, the shrimp, the hard part that you peel off when you eat it. And that, when it's ground up, it makes surface area like charcoal, and it binds to toxins in your body and carries them out. Lectins, mitogens, plant phytates, heavy metals, and carries them out of your body. So that's really useful. I think that sleep is extremely important. We talk a lot in this group about sleep. There are some antioxidant markers that you can use to look for sleep if you don't have the money for a proper sleep study. A proper sleep study can be thousands of dollars, and sometimes insurance will pay for it, sometimes it doesn't. The other aspect is really a more keto or carnivore diet generally. If a person can lower their carbohydrates and increase their fats and increase their animal fats and increase their saturated fats and increase their protein, they generally do better. Now, a lot of people that are transitioning will do really well with 100 grams of carbs a day, and others will do 50, and others that are keto will do 25. If you go towards zero carbs or 25 grams of carbs to be keto, and you're having trouble with your blood sugar, you might need to hang out for a few weeks at 100 milligrams or 50 milligrams of carbs before you hit that really deep ketosis. And that's just because people, they need their pancreas to kick in and create insulin, and they can have delays in their handling of glucose, their production of insulin, their production of glucagon. On the other hand, if they've got high blood pressure, which hang on for, and you'll get another episode on high blood pressure, we'll talk about how to fix that relatively quickly with a diet that is really low carb. But you got to be careful with your gallbladder, your pancreas, and your liver output, because it can take a few weeks to get those back online and allow them to produce the right amounts of bile. And that can take a while. It can really be tough. Even on professional athletes, it often takes them 12 weeks. So your emotional reactions would be another one, not just your thoughts. So if you got ruminative thoughts, I told you how to fix that. Emotional reactions are another one. If you find yourself suddenly just going, I had this reaction, then try to prime yourself to what kind of reaction do I want in the future, and start crafting that and thinking about that reaction that you want in the future. I want to be more in charge. I want to be more in control. I want to be slower to gasp. I want to be more capable of catching the reaction before it becomes big. I want to be able to maybe even not have the reaction in the future. And as you think about that, you'll kick in self-regulation parts of your brain. And there's a bunch of self-regulation parts of your brain, the frontal lobes and the parietal lobes, the temporal lobes, and of course the basal ganglia as well. I do want to mention that the basal ganglia is highly sensitive to toxins and man-made chemicals and metals. Realize also that your neurofeedback can help quite a bit. Neurofeedback can help with self-regulation. You can do that by doing neurofeedback to the frontal lobes, especially to the anterior cingulate, which is right in the middle of your frontal lobes. And you can do that with what's called EEG band neurofeedback. That would be where you either ask questions, patient would give questions and answers to their therapist, and their therapist would target the neurofeedback along the traditional EEG bands, which would be the traditional waves from 0 to like 40 hertz, which would be delta bands and theta bands and alpha and gamma bands. These are bands that can be brought down or made higher depending on what your spectrum looks like. And if you've got too much fast waves, like too much beta waves and beta spindling, we're going to try to tune that down. And if you've got not the right alpha frequency, we might try to tune that alpha frequency and make the peak be a little faster or a little slower. And that can be done with pretty typical old school, just 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 electrodes from all kinds of neurofeedback that exists in the world, all over the world, from really cheap to really expensive. You can also do a more advanced method, which is infralow neurofeedback. I like that a lot. And that's a method that a therapist asks you questions, and they don't need an EEG, although an EEG and ERP is really helpful. These are tests of passive brain waves and active brain waves, and they can sometimes give you a good map. But really, you don't need that for most of these basic neurofeedback systems. You can just answer questions, and your symptoms will guide your therapist about where to place the electrodes and where to, what frequencies to put them on and how long to train you and how to watch you and all that stuff. So the really cool thing about infralow is that there are a bunch of placements that are affecting self-regulation. And so self-regulation is that control of your autonomic nervous system, which is your temperature, it's your blood pressure, it's your pulse, and it's your emotional volatility, and it's your immune volatility. So believe it or not, if you're really good at infralow neurofeedback, you might be able to tune your brain so that your brain can control your immune system so you don't have as much allergies, you don't have as much food sensitivities, because ultimately the T regulatory cells, the T helper cells, the Th1 and the Th2 cells, all the inflammatory cytokines are under the direction and control of your basal ganglia, your brain, and your limbic system. And ultimately your cerebellum too. And I talk about chiropractic neurology and training the cerebellum through balance and eye movements. Today I'm talking more about neurofeedback and infralow neurofeedback to do that. So these are all things that can help train us when our brains get away from us and we don't like what they're doing. We can also do traditional brain rehab that is more chiropractic neurology and less brain wave based. And that would be more something that is like cerebellar training. That would be standing on a platform, standing on one leg, closing your eyes, being on a firm surface or a wobbly surface that's insecure and unstable to measure how your body handles, and your cerebellum specifically, which is that back part of your brain. Right here in the back of this guy's brain is the cerebellum in the back, right back here. And so the cerebellum is something that chiropractic neurologists specialize in, and they can help you go through that. If you've got a problem that doesn't respond to neurofeedback, Neurofeedback works on the top of the brain and can reach down to a certain level, but it can't reach the cerebellum. So you might need a chiropractic neurologist that's board certified, or a regular chiropractor, a general practice chiropractor that knows these things, and they can really help. They can do eye movements, they can do balance stuff, they can do facial movements, tongue movements, pelvic floor exercises, psoas work. They can work on your fingers and your toes. They can do stuff to your painting your face. We do this in autism quite a bit. We do brushing, face brushing and skin brushing. There's just so many things that you can do in functional neurology. So I think that that is a really good set of biohacking things for you. And, naturally, you can also go to a counselor, a therapist. I'm not a counselor or a therapist. I work with them all the time, and I think it's very good for you to use them. But what I wanted to give you was, what do you do outside of talk therapy and drug therapy? What do you do outside of that? And I think that's very useful. I also want to say, as I end here, that the changing the brain, it responds really well to getting rid of stimulants like too much caffeine, too much nicotine, too much NutraSweet, too much artificial colors, flavors, and preservatives are known to really ramp up the brain. Taking magnesium can calm the brain down. Making sure that a person has enough potassium and magnesium will calm the brain down. Enough zinc will help calm the brain. Enough lithium orotate for B12. Often there's a number of people that don't tolerate methyl B12 supplements very well, and they need to switch to hydroxy or adenosyl B12 and take lithium orotate, not the medical lithium, but the over-the-counter safe stuff that's, really not reactive. And they sell it in 5 milligram pills in the health food store. It's not the same as the prescription lithium that you get for bipolar and other types of problems. I'm really excited to show you all these things that can be very, very useful.